Hi, everybody. With their groundbreaking approach to producing net zero biofuels from used cooking oil, just think about it, this company is setting new standards in environmental responsibility and technological advancement. Let me introduce Neutral Fuels. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Builder Nation. Today, we are joined by Karl Feilder, CTO and founder at Neutral Fuels. Plus, also, it is worth mentioning that Karl does some amazing work communicating and sharing the ins and outs not only of neutral fuels and what they do, but of biofuels as a whole. Karl, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. As I told you already,
Thanks. It's lovely to be here.
I'm
Thank you
very
very
excited
much.
to have you here. Please introduce yourself a little bit.
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm Carl. I've got 3 kids and I want them to have a decent future. So I decided 16 years ago I was going to spend the rest of my career, whatever time I've got left, to try and improve the situation. And I started Neutral Fuels. And the whole idea of Neutral Fuels is that I wanted to produce fuel that has a carbon neutral impact on the environment. And we've been going pretty well for the last 12 years. We're the largest producer of biofuels in the Middle East. In fact, when I moved here, people thought I was completely crazy. They said, well, how could you want to move to the Middle East? That's like the fossil fuel capital of the world. And you want to move there and start a biofuels business? I said, well, yeah, because nobody else is doing it. So yeah, that's what I've been doing.
And that's true. You sort of got it right into the hornet's nest, as they say, right? But that's amazing. Oh yes, you were gonna say something. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, it was a really good plan to move here. The biofuels industry has been going for 20 or 30 years. In fact, in 1938, they made the first biodiesel, and the original diesel engine that was designed by Rudolf, and his middle name genuinely was Karl, Rudolf Karl Diesel. He actually came up with an engine that ran on peanut oil originally. It didn't run on a
Wow.
processed fossil fuel. And so, in fact, what we've done is gone back to the original idea.
Hmm.
And it's really quite straightforward, the whole process. There's a lot of chemical engineering involved, and there's a lot of quality standards, a lot of attention to detail. But essentially, we're running engines on a very, very similar fuel to diesel, except that it's very, very clean, very, very green, and very, very sustainable.
Right, and that's actually a very cool thing that I wanna dive. But before getting jumping into how did you come up and the formula and more or less the process and the differences, we're gonna touch all of that. But before that, you already mentioned something which is very cool. You said 16 years ago you started this. However, for what I gather, Neutral Fuels has been around ever since 2010 or something, all around 14 years now. So that gives a 3 year gap, right? How did you first jump into the biofuel world in the first place? Because it's not a common industry, I would say, like not like other industries, for example, the regular oil, robotics, maybe. So, how did you first find yourself immersed in it?
Well, actually, I'm a tech geek. So I'm on my second career now. I started my first company a long time ago and sold it to Microsoft.
Oh,
And I've
cool.
been growing and selling software companies for most of my career.
Uh-huh.
And then 16 years ago, I sold the last company, which was a cryptography company doing real complicated maths cryptograms. And we
Nice.
decided that we needed to do something more important than just making money. And my wife challenged me. She said, you've got 3 kids now. You need to do something that actually makes a difference. I said, well, hey, I'm out there making money. And she said, no, not making money. You've actually got to work out how to save the planet. And I thought, well, nobody's ever made any money out of trying to save the planet. They wander around, they've got long beards, and they tend to wear weird clothes, and they tree hug. And how am I going to do that? She said, well, if you think you're so darn clever, you work out how to make money and save the planet at the same time. And within 2 weeks, I was sitting in front of the CEO of DHL, the courier company.
Wow.
And he asked me, he said, Carl, can you do something to help us? We need to work out our carbon footprint and we need to reduce it. And that was at the end of 2006. And so I came back within a couple of weeks with a proposal for him. And I then spent the next 3 years running that program for DHL globally, looking after the carbon footprint of 13,500 buildings and 200,000
Wow.
vehicle and 423 aircraft. And that carbon footprint was simply huge. And we looked at somewhere over 300 different technologies. And one of the technologies we looked at was biofuels. So we ran
Hmm.
2 biofuels pilot programs, one in Germany, one in the UK. And we found that there was a very, very straightforward way of taking a waste product and commercially converting it into a fuel that has a very low carbon footprint. And
Wow.
I happened to do a project for Dubai government towards the end of that time. And the Dubai government said to me, well, can you look at what we could do to reduce the carbon footprint of transportation in
Hmm.
Dubai? And they were already doing a lot. But I said to them, well, what you really need is a biofuels business. And after they'd finished laughing, they said, you're serious, aren't you? I said, yeah, I'm serious. So I said, well, if you give me permission to do this, I'll do it. And that was 12 years ago. So
Wow.
it's been a rock and roll lifestyle ever since. Really, really difficult to get some things to happen. It nothing's easy, and my grandma used to say, if it ain't hard, it's not worth doing, and that's indeed what we found with this business. But now coming through, we got COP28 starting in a few weeks' time here in Dubai, and when I
Wow.
moved here all those years ago, I mean, most people didn't know anything about sustainability, and the general public generally didn't care. And
Hmm.
in a couple of weeks' time, we've got the entire United Nations and the world focused on Dubai as the center of sustainability. It's amazing, absolutely amazing.
It is very cool, and I mean that just comes to show. I was telling you before the interview started how I've been following a few of your conferences now for a while. It just clicked to me how important it was to invest all that time and effort into sharing the word, right, spreading the word about biofuels. Because I didn't even consider it. Yes, you were right in the middle of the oil industry, sort of the hub, right, for the world. It is very
Well,
cool.
yeah, we've done a lot of outreach programs as well. I mean, we
Hmm.
go into schools, we go out to universities. We've had, for the last 10 years, we've had a very active internship program. So we take normally chemical engineers, but we've taken a
Hmm.
few other graduates as well, straight out of university. We give them their first taste of work.
Cool.
We work them hard, but we smile about it while we're doing it. And we give them some real insight into what it's like working in a really sustainable business, actually making a difference every single day. And
Yeah.
this is what it's all about, from respecting people, making sure that they're well looked after and well regarded in their work environment, but giving them true purpose, getting up every single morning knowing that you're doing something that's going to make the world a better place. That's just fantastic.
It is fantastic, and also I really appreciate how you're actually giving this opportunity to these young people straight out of the university. As a chemist myself, I understand how valuable that opportunity is. So that's really cool. Now you mentioned something which is very, very mind blowing. You mentioned that after 2 weeks of that, your wife told you to do something different. You spoke with the CEO of DHL, I believe you said, right? And then it took around 3 years, you mentioned, to actually launch and really start off the program for these biofuels and for really turning everything. What happened during these 3 years? How heavy were the R&D efforts to bring something as special as biofuel from? I mean, the fact that it is from used cooking oil is mind blowing. How heavy was that R&D efforts during those 3 years?
Well, actually, the more complex part was how to distill the vast amount of information that was out there into a new business model that would actually
Mm,
work. The the chemistry has been, as I said, it's been known since 1938.
right.
Cooking oils, vegetable oils, are essentially triglyceride molecules, which means that they are molecules with 3 legs,
Yeah.
effectively, and each of those legs is a carbon chain. And so the chemistry is really simple. You have to work out a way, and we use a catalyst and heat. You cut the links between those carbon chains, and then you add on something to the end of them to stabilize those molecules, and you end up with a hydrocarbon-like molecule that
Hmm.
looks to an engine just like diesel. But in fact, it's something called a fatty acid methyl ester, which has got 16, 17, 18 carbons in the carbon chain, and then hydrogens either side, just like a hydrocarbon.
Hmm.
And then the magic part is it's got one oxygen atom on the end. And that means that the biofuel burns cleaner because
Hmm.
it's got oxygen injected directly into the engine.
Wow.
And it means we get less tailpipe emissions, and it's better for everybody in the local environment as well.
Right. Now that we're already talking about the chemistry, I mean, basically, essentially, what you described is pretty much the octanes, right? Of the way that octanes work, right? For in gasoline. Um, it is clear, or at least it is viable to understand how this is a cleaner method of generating combustion for engines, etc. But how does the efficiency side look for this in terms of
Well,
compared to diesel, for example?
the interesting thing is that diesel engines don't work like petrol engines.
Hmm.
So the diesel engine actually uses the fuel as part of the lubrication of the engine.
Oh.
And it's a strange sort of design, but it's based on the way that diesel doesn't have spark plugs to create a spark. It
Hmm.
actually creates the explosion by compressing the gas and fuel mixture.
Right.
And that cylinder head is moving up and down. And as it's moving up and down, it's actually being lubricated by fuel, by the diesel fuel on either
Oh.
side. And the fatty acid methyl ester that we produce, or biodiesel as it's
Yeah.
called, is more slippery than normal fuel. It has what's called a
Mm.
higher lubricity. So when you use that fuel in an engine, it actually reduces the amount of friction that's going on in the engine. And that
Mm.
compensates for the fact that the fatty acid methyl ester molecule has slightly less energy in it than a
Hmm.
normal diesel molecule. So what we found in most cases is we get a slight improvement in fuel economy when they're
Wow.
running on 100% biofuel. And that surprised us because all the academic research that we did said that it wouldn't happen, and that we might lose maybe 1 or 2 or 3% fuel
Yeah.
economy. And what we found is we're actually getting 3, 4, 5% improvement by using 100% biodiesel.
That's pretty interesting. And the fact that it is far more lubricant, this biodiesel, does that affect in the long run in any way the engine in terms of maintenance? Does it affect it to the way that you have to do maintenance differently or faster or
Yeah,
it
there's
lasts longer?
Yeah, the other property that biodiesel or fatty acid methyl ester has is that it acts as a cleaning agent in the fuel system. So
Wow.
if you have a brand new engine, you can run it on 100% biodiesel and the engine runs clean and there's no problem. But if you've run the engine on dirty diesel for a long while,
Hmm.
within the fuel pipes and within the pumps and indeed within the fuel tank, you get a buildup of carbon deposits and sulfur and all sorts of interesting things. And
Okay.
when you put the biodiesel through there, it actually acts to liquidate those deposits,
Like a
and
dissolver.
they end up through, yeah, everything, and it ends up flowing through and gets caught in what's called the fuel filter. A fuel filter
Wow.
is like $30 to change. So the first couple of times you run on biodiesel, you have to screw off the fuel filter and you put a new one on, and it costs you $30, and it's not a big deal. But it means all that rubbish that was in the fuel
Uh-huh.
system gets removed from the fuel system, and you end up with a far cleaner burning engine and a far cleaner fuel system. So that's one modification that you have to do. But in terms of everything else, we found we don't have to change anything about the way that these
Wow.
engines work. We can run one day on biofuel, and we can run the next day on regular fuel, and then back it forwards and chop and change, no matter what you want to do. And the liquid is completely miscible. So biodiesel mixes 100% with diesel. So once it's mixed together, you can't separate it. So it actually doesn't matter whether you're running 100% one day, 0% the next day, 25% the next day. It doesn't make any difference in terms of the engine performance.
That is very interesting. I did not expect that it was just so similar or equivalent in many senses. That's actually pretty cool. Now, but this raises a question that I feel you are the perfect person to ask. If biofuel is so effective, it doesn't require any added maintenance. It doesn't require any additional volume for the same energy output. Why isn't biofuel today a common replacement for diesel?
Well, funnily enough, it is. There's now more than 64 countries that have mandated that biodiesel is blended with regular diesel in every drop of diesel that they sell. And that
Nice.
includes all of the European Union since 2003. So 20 years ago, the
Wow.
European Union said all diesel, every drop that's sold at the filling station, has to have at least 5% biodiesel blended into it. And now
Wow.
they've just increased that to 7%, and they've got a plan to increase it to 10% and further.
Hmm.
So it has been included in many countries' mandatory diesel specifications for quite a while because it adds that extra lubricity and makes the engines run a bit better and it burns cleaner. So
Right.
it has been there in a lot of different places. I think the thing is that in the States, it hasn't been mandated
Yeah.
federally. And because a lot of the news reporting is in English and comes from the United States, people don't think that it's been widely adopted, but it has been widely adopted in many
Wow.
countries of the world.
Now then, that does raise a different question. So, if currently diesel already has 5, 7, up to 10% going forward of biodiesel, sort of in the mixture, right? Is it today a viable option to have an exclusively biodiesel station, for example, that is 100% biodiesel, or does that run into manufacturing problems, into transportation problems? How does that
No,
work?
there's no problems at all. In fact, we've been running, we partnered with McDonald's in 2011.
Uh-huh.
And since 2011, every drop of cooking oil in our country here, the United Arab Emirates, every drop of cooking oil from the McDonald's restaurants has come to us. And we've
Nice.
recycled it into 100% biodiesel. And since 2011, the, the distribution trucks distributing the food to the McDonald's restaurants in our country, all of them have been running on 100% biodiesel. They've not used
Amazing.
any fossil fuel since 2011. And we've done that without any changes to the way that the customers buy their Big Mac and fries. Everybody just
Yeah,
treats everything as normal. The truck drivers drive normally, they fill up with us, they
so
bring us the
cool.
waste oil, and it just works. And it took a huge leap of faith because everybody, including the engine manufacturers, said it wouldn't work. But to come back to a question you asked a minute ago, I didn't answer completely. So we found that we can extend the engine life of the vehicles by
Hmm.
quite a considerable amount, like 30 or 40%. If they're running purely on
Wow.
biodiesel, then the engine lasts a huge amount of time longer. And that is maybe why the motor manufacturers don't really like it, because it actually means that they don't need to replace their vehicles so often.
Wow, that's actually amazing. I noticed that you went dark for a little second. Don't worry if you
Yeah,
want to take
I
take a
have
minute to
a
fix it up.
just give me a technical moment here to fix
that's
this.
to, that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. I mean, it happens to all of us. Okay, I have to say, it is it is very amazing to see how it's not just an individual effort, right? As you mentioned, like at the beginning, it was sort of well, I'm just speaking to these industry leaders, trying to not sell them, but sort of get into the technology. And now you have McDonald's as a partner. It's uh, it's actually a pretty cool thing. Ah, there we go. That's a little better. That's nice.
We actually started off with McDonald's. They were our first customer. And when we started the business, they were our first customer and our first supplier. And for the first year, we had a complete closed loop implementation of what they would call circular economy. So
Right.
all of the supply of the waste cooking oil came from McDonald's, and all of the product that we produced was used by McDonald's.
Yeah,
And I have
that's
to say, I
amazing.
mean, when we started out, I think we were doing something like 70 or 80,000 liters a month of fuel production. And I think last month we hit 3 million liters. So
Nice.
we've
That's
grown quite a lot in
scaling.
those years.
That's
It's pretty
scaling.
cool.
That is
Um,
amazing.
we're very, I mean, and the lovely thing is that our customers are really happy with us. We're really happy. We've still got most of the customers from those early days, 12 years ago. When we moved from McDonald's, we started with Del Monte, and then we moved on to some of the other McDonald's supply chain partners. And those guys are still buying fuel from us today. They're very, very happily running on our fuel.
That is amazing, I have to say. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't expect such different industries to work so well together, like the fast food industry and biofuel. It's amazing. But now I want to touch a different side of your efforts, right? The efforts that you are doing, as you know, within neutral fuels, for overall this main idea of just improving the world, helping people, helping make sure the world stays a, a good enough place to live, right? And that is that you don't only do biofuel, right? But you also have a reforestation program, right? So within this vision, within this mindset, what role could this reforestation play, and what are the main challenges in it, so that you can just give the same effort to it as you have been to the biofuels so far? What's the role?
Well, it's a really, really good question. We started out looking at reforestation about 3 or 4 years ago, because when we make our fuel, it's very, very low carbon footprint. In fact, we are graded every year by an inspector from the European Union who comes and makes sure that we're doing our sums right and checks what we're doing. And I think last year they gave us an 86.5% carbon reduction. So if you use 100% fuel from us, it reduces your carbon footprint by 86.5%.
Wow.
But that still means we're left over with sort of 13.5%.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't really do much about that. That's due to the fact that we have to buy in some chemicals, we have to use electricity. We just generally have a little bit of carbon
Yeah,
footprint left over.
part of the entire
So,
process. Yeah.
so 3 or 4 years ago, we looked at how we could effectively offset or get rid of that remaining carbon footprint. And I started looking around at reforestation programs, because I figured that actually photosynthesis of plants is pretty straightforward. It extracts carbon dioxide from the air, it
Yeah.
sequesters carbon, and it releases oxygen. This is a good thing, and it's pretty straightforward. You plant a tree and it grows. But as I dug into it, I found that it was way more complicated than that. First of all, you got to plant the right tree,
In
and
the right
that was
place.
quite
Yeah.
in the right place. And if you plant the wrong tree in the wrong place, you end up having to fertilize and water that tree, and the fertilizer and the water has a carbon footprint of its own. So
Mm-hmm.
you needed to find places that were planting indigenous trees in the right type of location. And after looking around many, many locations, we found a fabulous project in South Africa, and they had a great program to actually reintroduce trees to land that had previously been taken for cattle farming. And they bought the land back and said, okay, we're not going to do cattle farming anymore. We're actually going to replant the trees that were here originally. And that, to me, is a sort of perfect example of reforestation. But what we subsequently found, and this has been a huge problem for the carbon credit industry recently in the last year or so, we found that it's very difficult to verify what the carbon savings actually are. And there's been a couple of scandals recently where people, very well-known companies have bought
Uh-huh.
carbon credits from reforestation schemes. They paid their money, they've reported the carbon savings, and the trees never grew. And that's a real
Right.
problem. So we've been looking at how we could do that, and I haven't got a complete solution to it at the moment. But there's a bunch of guys working with Google on the Google Earth system,
Yeah.
so that they can use satellite imagery to validate whether or not the trees have been planted and how well they're growing and how much forestation you've actually achieved. And they can do that on a monthly basis. And
Wow.
this is a fantastic way of verifying exactly what's going on. So reforestation for me is still first prize, but it's definitely a challenge, and there's definitely a need to have a properly audited way, a third-party way of inspecting and verifying what's going on.
Now, that does raise one question to me. Now, you already mentioned that one of these challenges, first of all, is sort of how to monitor this growth and everything, and how you're dealing with it. But are you investing in protection efforts for existing forests? Because what you already mentioned, right? Planting trees takes a long time for them to grow and do their function at a volume high enough that it is actually worth considering in the math, right? Because when they're just growing, it's not a lot. So, do you invest in protection efforts of already existing areas so that they are not deforested in the in the future, or even in the same plots you currently plant?
We we don't, but your point is extremely well made. It's actually very much better to not chop the trees down in the first place than to chop them down and 100 years later to plant new trees. It's a lot better to just leave them growing. And that is what a lot of the carbon credit schemes are trying to do now, is to
Mm,
promote the idea of protecting the forests that we've actually got and helping them to generate money for indigenous communities so that they've got an incentive to not chop the trees
right.
down to grow soybean or to grow chocolate plant or anything. You know,
Hmm.
cacao is a major problem with this as well. So we've got to find ways to motivate people. But if you're poor and somebody's given you some land, and if you chop it down, you're going to make more money, people are probably going to chop the trees down. So we have to work
Right,
out a
of
way
course.
of helping them make the right decision. Equally, it's not an easy decision. A lot of the world's vegetable oil comes from Malaysia and Indonesia, and it's from the palm tree because it's actually a very, very efficient way of creating vegetable oil.
Hmm.
But those palm trees weren't there originally. I mean, I've flown over them to go on inspection visits, and those palm trees grow in straight lines. And you know that that's not natural when
Yeah,
something
no,
grows in an absolutely straight line. It was planted, it's a
that seems made.
plantation.
Yeah.
And we dug into that a little bit more to find out exactly what was the cause of all that. And they told me, well, actually, you know, it's you British that caused the problems because 150 years ago, you told
Hmm.
us to chop down the rainforest and plant rubber because you needed it for wheels for your motor cars.
Right.
So we chopped them down, planted rubber trees. And then when the rubber industry changed, we chopped the rubber trees down and we planted palm trees so that we could make vegetable oil. And now, today in Indonesia, 50 million people depend on that industry for their livelihoods. So while
Wow.
the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals promote the idea of the end of poverty, and they also promote the idea of climate action, if we decided that we were not going to use palm oil anymore because it generally causes deforestation because
Yeah,
people grow more and more.
it's a
If we
contradiction.
stopped
Yeah.
using palm oil, we would end up creating poverty for lots and lots of people. And these are some of the really tricky challenges that we all face when it comes to living a more sustainable life. We've got ourselves into a right pickle, as my grandma would have said.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even consider that part of. I mean, but it is true what you just said, right? That the very fact that for 100 years the oil industry has been going on, it's interesting to see this contradiction that you just shared with us, right? That we want to move into a more green future, but then all of the people working in what makes it a sort of a dirty world, where they're gonna go. That's actually a pretty interesting thing to say. Now, I could definitely keep talking about this over and over and over and over because it's so interesting, and there's just so much that I want to ask you. But hey, I want to be respectful of your time, so I just have a couple last questions before we leave over here. All right. Number one is what are the next efforts you're going to be doing for through neutral fuels for these biofuels? For example, are you planning to expand to more countries, maybe come to America for this, or is it rather just a plan of just improving your current biofuels? Like, where are the efforts oriented?
We're trying to get more people to understand the way that we've adopted our business model. So we believe that if you can truly make fuel out of waste, which is what we've been doing and we now proven for more than a decade,
Hmm.
the users of the fuel tend to live in cities and the
Right.
producers of the waste tend to live in cities. So we should actually build the refineries just outside cities. In fact, we should source local waste, refine it locally, and use it locally. Because something like 30% of the world's shipping is moving oil and gas around the world. That
Wow.
all, if you think about moving, the model has to change. For the last 150 years, we've worked on the assumption that crude oil exists in a few countries but everybody in the world wants to use it. So we have to move things around. And indeed, when you move a shipload of crude oil, when it lands, when it comes to dock, you need a huge refinery in order to turn that huge quantity of oil into fuel that's then used all over the country.
Right.
Whereas if you think about it being produced from waste, the refineries don't need to be huge because they only need to service one city at a time. So
Mm-hmm.
you source the waste locally. You don't have to transport the waste halfway around the world, and you use it locally. The advantages that we found to this in our business model is that you cut out the middlemen. You
Mm-hmm.
cut out the middlemen in the upstream from the waste to the refinery, and you cut out the middlemen in the refinery to the end user.
Right.
Because if you're selling in smaller quantities, you can sell to individual fleets of buses and individual fleets of vehicles. So the first thing that we want people to do is to realize that we have to change the economic model of the fuel industry. It has to become a local process. And that's true whether we're producing waste,
Mm-hmm.
physical waste, so municipal solid waste, into aviation fuel, or
Right.
whether we're converting locally sourced methane gas from dumps and we're turning that into other forms of liquid fuels, or whether we're processing cooking oil or even animal fats. These are all things that exist in cities, and therefore it's a city scale approach that's required. So that's the first thing we're trying to push out there. And the
Mm-hmm.
other thing that we're trying to push out there is to get more and more people using these biofuels. So about 4 years ago, we started supplying ships, and now that's become a
Wow.
huge part of our business. Every day we're fueling school buses, which is a good thing. We're fueling lots of
That's nice.
trucks. We're fueling all the McDonald's trucks, but we're now moving on to ships. And the shipping industry really needs our help because they don't have many other alternatives at the moment.
Right.
So we're selling into the shipping industry. And the next thing we've got our eye on is a few other little things coming down the line. I can't tell you about it. But
Ah.
the idea is to just keep showing people through courageous innovation that thinking outside the box
Right.
can produce good results. And if you've got good engineering and you've got good business people, you can actually make it happen. But the best way to demonstrate that to people is to do it and show them. So our motto is acta non verba, action, not words. We prefer to show people what we're doing and let them try and copy us.
Wow, that is amazing. In fact, the last question is to ask you for advice, but you already shared with us a few in just this last sentence. So I'm gonna shake it up a little bit, all right? Because this reply that you just gave us is honestly, it's amazing. And I did want to dive a little bit into the price differences between the oils and everything, but uh, I understand that that would be a rather long answer. I assume so. I guess we're gonna have it. We're gonna have to save it for another day. But the main thing, or the important thing that I do want to ask here regarding to this advice and following down the line, you just mentioned that it's better to act, not say. Right? Is what advice do you have for that young person, that young entrepreneur who is starting their own career in this part that doesn't have the network, doesn't have the money, the funds, the investment, that doesn't have all of these tools around him or her, right? What advice do you give them to to help them keep going so they see their vision come to reality?
Well, the first thing I would say, if the target for that question is young entrepreneurs, is make sure you're really an entrepreneur. I wrote my
Mm,
master's thesis on trying to psychologically profile entrepreneurs, so I've got some pretty deep thoughts on who
wow.
is entrepreneurs and who is not.
Right.
And I reckon it's about 3% of the population are actually entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, it's become quite a fashionable thing to tell people that you're an entrepreneur and to get going, and you write an app and you sell it to a few people, and then maybe you think you've got a business there.
Right.
But first of all, make sure you're an entrepreneur. Secondly, if you really are an entrepreneur, telling me that it's hard now and you can't have access to networks and there's no money and you can't find out how to do it. Oh, come on, stop whinging. We've been doing this for decades and decades and decades. Entrepreneurs start businesses in the trickiest of times, in the worst possible scenarios, in the worst possible places you can imagine. And that's all character building. And it's what you do as you're an entrepreneur. You wake up in the morning knowing that you can make the world a better place. And that drive and motivation, that's what sees us through. And people find it infectious. So once you're out there and you're doing this, you will find that good things come towards you. The money comes towards you. The success comes towards you. People who want to support you come towards you. It's all about having a positive attitude and just getting on and doing it. So that's my advice. Make sure you're an entrepreneur and then stop whinging. Just get on with it.
Toughen up. That is great advice. Thank you very much for that. And I believe that is the perfect wrap to this interview. I really, really appreciate not just sharing with us about biofuels and everything, but also about entrepreneurship and about why should we make an effort into making the world a better place. That is something I truly appreciate. Thank you very much. Before I let you go, all right, everybody wants, I can guarantee you, everybody wants to hear more about what you have to say. So where can we find you and where can we find Neutral Fuels? In social media and the website? Where are you?
So the best place to find me is on LinkedIn, and you look for Karl with a K, Karl W. Feilder, and Feilder is Feilder. Or you can find my personal website, which is karlwfeilder.com. And there you'll find a whole load of interesting stuff, videos, interviews that I've done with people, a lot of stuff. You'll also find access to my 2 albums that I've released. I'm working on the 3rd album in the studio at the moment. The 2nd album is what I like to call eco rock. So I'm trying to use rock songs as a way of communicating to people that we need to do more about saving the planet.
Wow.
And you can go to neutralfuels.com, which is where you're going to get all the best information about biofuels and about how to actually make waste into fuel.
That is amazing. Thank you very much. I'm actually sharing Neutral Fuels' website and your own right here in the chat, Karl W. Feilder.com, right? I did take a glance at it before. It's actually pretty cool. You even had a podcast at some point, right? Like that you ran a podcast. That's pretty cool. I mean, as a podcast host, that's pretty cool. Anyway, thank you very much for that. We're gonna be sharing those in the chat over here for people to just come and see it. But now, remember that you guys can find more information, interesting articles, interviews, clips, shorts, blogs, just a lot of content on our website, right? buildernation.io, and as Builder Nation across all social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everywhere, right? We're gonna have to hear from you. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for joining us in this community, Karl. This was genuinely a pleasure and a very, very knowledgeable conversation. I appreciate it. I learned a lot. We're so lucky to have you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity. Cheers.
When building the future is your priority, tedious procurement processes should be last on your list. The problem is that purchasing data is scattered across spreadsheets, receipts, emails, and messages. Tracking it all sucks and makes it easy to commit mistakes. Introducing the Control Hub Way, the all-in-one purchasing software for hardware companies. Buying parts, services, or office supplies? Submit a quick purchase request to buy from your list of approved vendors, or buy from a new provider. Buying from approved vendors is even easier. Import your shopping cart directly into your purchase request using our checkout integrations. When the order is ready, submit it for approval. We'll ping all pre-designated approvers both via Control Hub's website, email, and Slack notifications for a faster turnaround. If you need a PO, we got you. Generate it in one click. Online purchase? Boom, virtual card. Do an automatic 3-way match, pay invoices, and sync everything live with QuickBooks or NetSuite. Purchasing just got a lot easier. Control Hub. Get back to building.